Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast. My guest on the podcast today is Josephine Reynolds. Now, if I said we were about to hear the extraordinary story of Britain's first female firefighter, then hopefully you will not be a stranger to Josephine's story. But before we get in there, let's hear a little bit from our Firefighter Podcast family. A big thanks once again to our partner Blue Light Card. Now, Blue Light Card, they work to recognise the hard work and commitment of those individuals carrying out some of the most important jobs in our community by offering members an amazing selection of online and in-store discounts at over 15,000, that's right, 15,000 commercial partners across the UK. I strongly encourage you to head over to bluelightcard.co.uk. I mean, me and my family have been investing in some tech recently. Now, of course, we headed over to Blue Light Card like we always do to check what discounts are available. We upgraded our Sky package, got like 25% off. Bought my daughter an iPad the other month, and we got an Apple saving as well from Blue Light Card, and all of our phone contracts with O2 as well. And yeah, that's right, Blue Light Card have got us a discount, looking after us every single direction we turn. My strong encouragement is do not make a financial decision, do not make a purchase without checking out bluelightcard.co.uk. Also want to give a shout out to our media partners, the Emergency Services Times and the Emergency Services Show. We're also working in line with the Cheshire Fire Challenge and the British Firefighter Challenge. Competition's back on in the UK towards the end of 2021. All the details are in the notes for the show. And now we're heard from those incredible people supporting the podcast. Let's jump in there and my introduction with the wonderful Josephine Reynolds. Josephine, good afternoon.
Hi.
There she is.
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah.
Very rare that I would do this, but I've actually written a very brief intro just because you've done so much stuff that I wanted to try and capture it all.
I'm
not sure about that. Yeah, go on.
I would love to have the chance to explain about the fact that I was hailed as the first female firefighter by the media at the time, but I wasn't necessarily the first. because there was a lady like in the late 70s who was retained, and there was a girl in London who was like a month or two before me. So it's like this like label that I've had to, it's been forced upon me in some places, but you know, I'm happy to, I'm like an early pioneer female firefighter who kind of was at the same time as the first in London. But in those days, we didn't know, it was like pre-Google.
But the big overarching outtake for me today is, like you say, there's the trailblazer aspect, there's the author, the professional speaker, and just the big advocate that you are for some of these really powerful things. Because with all due respect, and I don't know some of the other ladies that you referenced there, they're not better or worse than anybody else, but they haven't gone on to champion the causes in the same way that you have. So that's, you know, I appreciate that people have labelled you in that respect, but it's very much a compliment. And yeah, we won't leverage too much on that. But by all means, obviously, 100% bring it in, because it might be you've not had that chance to do it before. So let's do it.
Yeah, it's nice to do, because I also feel, when I wrote the book, I wanted to put in there that it was dedicated to female firefighters of the past, present, and future. But they wouldn't let me do that. Publishing house, they were like, no, this isn't about them, it's about you. I wrote quite a long, lovely thing, you know, and I was like, you know, unlike Josephine and the first, and there are things, you know, for a commercial reason, sometimes you end up in a situation that you don't necessarily expect yourself to be in. And you just have to keep going on with everything. But yeah, so there's some shit sometimes. But yeah.
I know what you're saying. You've got a really strong why that you want to do something, but then somebody's like, okay, you can do it, but you need to stand here and you need to wear this and you need to talk to that audience. And you're like, well, I just want to say it. And they're like, yeah, we want you to say it as well, but I want you to say it like this. And you're like, no. But then it's like, and that's why, and we've had quite a few brigades and stuff offer to be part of the podcast. And initially I was like, oh my God, yeah, amazing. And we've had them on as guests. But then I was kind of like, no, I don't want to do that, because at no point do I ever want anybody to be able to go, actually, Pete, that's not a true representation of X, London, Derbyshire. And I'd be like, well, it feels like a good thing to do to me. And whether or not you agree with whoever, Josephine or whatever guest's opinions, I think they're cool and I want to have them on. So it's kind of how I would be.
Yeah.
So,
I know what you mean. So many complexities that go on behind the scenes, aren't they? That, you know, keep moving forward.
It can be. So I'll run off an intro. Other than that, are you happy to get ready and go?
Yeah.
Let's do it. My guest on the podcast today is Josephine Reynolds. Josephine is one of the first ever full-time firefighters in the UK when she joined Norfolk in 1982. Josephine's a professional speaker and author of her book, Firewoman, The Extraordinary Story of Britain's First Female Firefighter. It's available in paperback, audiobook. I myself, of course, got it in audiobook, always on the go. Josephine tells her wonderful story whilst I've been going in the gym, whilst I've been out walking the dog. So I'm super familiar with Josephine's dulcet tones before our conversation today. Josephine is the very definition of a trailblazer by nature of the way she's lived her life during and more specifically after the fire service. We're going to get into a few bits of those today. She's really paved the way for females inside and outside the fire service. And I'm on a big promise from my daughter Lily to say hello from her, not from me, because I said I of course would say hello to Josephine as I was going to have a big long conversation with her. My daughter loves fire engines and she was super excited to hear we'd have one of the first ever fire women on the podcast. Jo, welcome.
Oh, how lovely. Thank you very much. It's Lily. Hi, Lily.
She is going to hear that because she hears, she goes, oh my God, Daddy, that person sounds really interesting. She says, who have you got coming on next? And I says, well, I've got this lady called Jo. And then I showed her your audiobook and then I unplugged my headphones and listened to her a bit. And she was like, you're going to have her on, blah, blah, blah. And then we went. And then I obviously spoke to you about the book, which we'll bring up later. But Jo, you first joined the fire service when you were 17. Which, for most people, like I couldn't join until I was 18. So what first inspired you to do it? Because things were a little bit different back in the 1980s, right?
Yeah, I was absolutely desperate for a job. I'd gone through school in Wales. My parents had been split up. My dad moved to Norwich and my mum moved to Pembrokeshire to get as far away from him as she could. So all I wanted to do growing up was like, you know, be independent, leave Wales. Because when you're growing up, nothing happens. It's so quiet. It's a beautiful place when you're an adult. So when I was 17 or 16, pardon me, Mum said to me, what do you want for your 16th birthday? And I said, Mum, I want a suitcase. And sure enough, I got a suitcase. And I moved up to that.
How did she take that statement? Because that would have stood a powerful statement to be told by your daughter.
I know. Well, we were always fighting, so it was a blessing in disguise. You know, she's the woman I love with all my heart. But yeah, so that wasn't unexpected. So I moved up to Norwich and I got 4 O levels and I was desperately trying to figure out how to get, you know, an income. my friends all went off to grammar school, and I didn't want to do that, obviously. Got enough O-levels. I thought I'd try and get into the police force as a cadet.
You weren't going for the police force. We'll edit that out, don't worry. I'm joking. No, very, very fun. We've had some wonderful police officers on. Sorry, we digress. Carry on.
No, it's so different, isn't it? So I was at my dad's waitressing and just looking in the evening news every week for the jobs to come up. And there was one for junior firefighters, and it was Norfolk Fire Service. So I had no idea what a firefighter did. I had not got a clue. I didn't really have any connection to them. Didn't know. But I just knew all I wanted to do was have my own door key and be away from like the controlling influence of my parents. So I applied, and it was the first time at Norfolk Fire Service had done a junior firefighter scheme, and it was also the first time that they'd opened the doors for women, unbeknown to me on both. So I just went along,
So how soon into going onto station did somebody say, "Oh, well, hi Joe, welcome to Norfolk Station. You're the first one we've ever had here," and you're still a bit like, why?
No, they were very much like that. When I started training, we had 15 months training at Wyndham in Norfolk. And as we went, part of our training was to go on secondments around the different stations. And some of the guys were very much like, I was there as a publicity stunt, and, I'd be a waste of money, taxpayers' money, or a girl can't do the job, especially a young girl. So, there was a lot of that kind of muttered around. It wasn't at the training, it wasn't in the training centre, to be fair.
How many people were on your training recruitment? How many people were on your training recruitment? 6.
5 lads of me.
Okay, so still intimidating, and you're still sort of uncommon among the uncommon people that still go for the fire service. But that's quite a small recruitment, because I've seen some courses of 20, 24 people, and perhaps there's only one female on there, and it does make me think. And I think this is even wrong in itself, because I've thought to myself, well, I better go over and say hi, just so they don't feel, just in case they do. But even in me thinking that, you kind of start second guessing yourself, and I'm like, why would I go and say hello to her specifically? I should say hello to everybody. But we digress. So there were 6, and you were still the only one there.
Yeah, that's it. So I was the first girl they took on. They got no facilities. Because they hadn't had any women in before. And like now, my chief said, looking back, he said, it's great because they learned as much as I learned from them. He said, we learned a lot from you, and you don't realise that at the time. You don't realise that you are helping people to kind of evolve their systems and their processes, and make sure you decide how things go. So we had a curtain between some lockers in the training room, and the boys used to peek. They used to pull the curtain back.
No,
when we were getting ready in our kit. Yeah,
that's a bit annoying.
So I stood there one day, like curtain back in my brown pants, like, now will you fuck off? And they said that was the moment they knew they'd be able to work with me. Like, that's it, she's going to be all right.
Did it all remain in good humour? Was there no moments of, oh, let's bucket Josephine with water because it will be hilarious, or anything like that?
No, not because I was a girl, but that's what we all did to everyone.
Yes,
exactly
I was going to say.
Yeah, that's it. And at the start of the course, how it is, everyone's really, it's really hard for everyone, not just me. It's really hard for lads as well. Gotcha. Some of the stronger physically, but not so good in the classroom, and vice versa. So, it's pretty tough 15 months.
What were some of the physical requirements when you first joined? What were sort of the physical testing or anything you had to go through?
Like, part of the interview was to carry the 12-stone dummy 100 yards in under a minute on your shoulders. Wow. And then naturally, of course, through training, you'd be doing loads of that with BA kits and, everything. So chemical incidents.
So let me just recap that backstory. You had to carry a 12-stone dummy on your shoulders. So this was the original fireman's lift, as it was, because now they've like completely outlawed that, because 12 stone, that's 72 kilos. That's heavy.
I know. And one of my favourite photos is me, one of the publicity photos that was taken at the time is about me holding my tutor Eddie Ziffle on my shoulders. We did it all the time, and that was normal, dragging those dummies, carrying the dummies, having, getting them out everywhere. So it's drills and accidents and incidents and first aid and, every kind of training everywhere.
You know what? We've come so far in so many ways, but I feel like we've gone backwards in some ways. And now I know a lot of health and safety and manual handling, and we don't want to make it all about this, has come because somebody's hurt themselves, and we don't want people to hurt themselves. But I hear recruits these days moaning about there's a 60-kilo dummy that we have at the training facility, and it's 10 stone. And they're like, oh, they're going to get the 60 out for us today. And I almost like, it triggers me, because I'm like, Oh, really? 60 kilos? That's difficult, is it? What, so you refusing to rescue anybody below 10 stone? I'm like, this is the UK, guys.
Yeah.
Come on. And back then, I love that. I love that you've said that as well, because that's definitely going out there. It was amazing to hear, because people will admire you because of your character and your perseverance and things like that. But you were holding yourself to a higher standard, but also you were kind of being held to a higher standard back then. And people say things like, oh, why don't we have people as passionate as Josephine anymore? And I say to myself, because we've lowered our standards in too many ways sometimes. And I don't want to make it about that, but is there an aspect of you having to push yourself that hard? Did you give yourself as many opportunities to quit or get out, or even as early on as your training, was there any moments where you were like, this is too hard, or that's too heavy, or I'm just, I don't think I'm supposed to be here?
I see anyone in training, there's a point sometimes, God, Jesus, what am I doing? We used to run 7 miles around the bloody fields in the morning. I hate running.
7 miles? Yes.
Yeah, it wouldn't run these bloody fields. And then you start the day, then it'd be ladders and bloody hose and, doing everything you do. But essentially, it was only kind of, you get to about, I think probably about, there's a point where you've started to get good at what you do, but you haven't kind of hit that point. There's a tipping point in there, and you're leading up to that. And then the tipping point comes, and you're like, yes, I know I can do this now. And that's when I knew there comes a point. There was a drill at the airport in Norwich. They've got all the old wrecked planes up there, and you went along and they set a drill, like the whole thing on one of them on fire, a tank on fire, and there.
I love those ones. Love them.
Yeah, they're great. It's so fun. So that was the kind of point for me when I was doing it. I thought, I can do this. I know what I'm doing. I'm comfortable in my skin doing my job. Yeah. And then you think, actually, now I don't care what anyone says, but until then you're kind of proving yourself. But the stuff with the boys, it wasn't just me. They were just the same.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. The people I referenced in that very, very brief explanation there, they were 2 lads that were talking about going to training school. Even this conversation isn't about sex and stuff like that, because there's many more challenges than just the physical aspects of the job. Then more so than now sometimes, because there was a lot more sort of practical skill sets that needed to be done there, because you had all the manual pumps, and there was a lot more listen and feel, and we haven't actually got another word for it now, I suppose, but sort of professional firemanship that was required to have the skill set to read the gate. Now, so much of the stuff is electronic, and I kind of feel like it's made it a little bit easier, but there's been so many people quit not because they don't think they're fit enough, because they don't think they're smart enough. I've had lads really worry about, even some of the basic mathematical calculations. I say basic, but some of the fireground mathematical equations that people need to come up with. So there's lots of people that struggle, most definitely. That's not just a woman thing. I see men failing by the dozen trying to get into the fire service these days. So after you'd got yourself in, we spoke a little bit about some of the movements that you made during your time in the fire service. Now, you've done some incredible work with women in the fire service, and you've got a really active Facebook group in and around it as well. Yeah. A lot of this was geared towards, from my interpretation, having looked at it, from mentorship and coaching and that value of association and showing people how to access the right kind of resources. Do you think there are still the same sort of barriers in trying to get promoted as there was when you first joined? Is it harder? Is it easier? Or has it just changed?
I don't really know, because it's such a long time. I mean, I left in like 89 or to go off travelling. So, truthfully, when I left, I knew what was going on in the fire service then. Then until I started to come back and research for the Firewoman book, which was like 2015, 2016, I'd been cut off from the fire service. And when I started to talk to people about the numbers, I couldn't believe it. I was like, I've been out of the service I don't know, what is it, nearly 30 years or so. It's like nothing's really changed. I couldn't believe it. How can this be? Really, guys,
But we've had Alex Johnson and people like that on the podcast, and they say themselves, they said it's still really difficult. even women in the fire service has been around for a very long time now, but they say it's still in many ways trying to turn the Titanic. Yeah,
but it can be done. It can be done. I see some stats through the groups of women, some of the different areas of different countries. Some parts of the USA, they've started to really turn. They've got like 30% women on their crews. Incredible. The work's going on in some parts of Australia. So, the group was set up. It is an almighty task to turn the Titanic, but it can be done. But it needs a real. It doesn't need to just be kind of almost like a hindsight result. It needs to be a really dogged determination from people to make it happen. You know, male champions of change. We love those. Don't we? You know, people who are actively making sure. You know, they're watching out to make sure things are going in the right direction.
I say we use the Titanic analogy, but it is a constant thing, like, you know, pushing that boulder up a hill, and you kind of, people have to keep tagging each other out. And you said, like you say, you left the service nearly 30 years ago and perhaps proverbially tagged in some of the other female champions that we've seen since then. And there's many that are wonderful in that respect. Who, as you've travelled through giving talks in the fire service in your speaking world, who have you found, either from when you were young or since you've done your travels, who's really inspired you in this sector, and sort of why have they triggered you to go bigger or have more big audacious goals? Because you've done some amazing stuff.
Yeah, I guess when I went to Australia, I was invited to speak down there, which is really fantastic, you know, just be as part of something they were doing, and to meet some of the women who've been literally some of their first in New Zealand and Australia. That was actually amazing. I think anyone, to be honest, anyone inspires me to actually, when I talk to people and it's not so much those people who inspire me, it's more people who, if I go to a talk at a school and a little girl will say, I didn't know I could be a firefighter. They're the ones who kind of, it's like turned on its head almost, like, oh God, they still don't realise, you know, the little ones. So that's what we need to do. We need to kind of turn it on its head. We need so many more visible role models. And there's a load of really great women out there, and men, you know, there's a load of great people being like champions of change, visible role models. But the thing is, until we change the minds of the children, then, you know, it won't change. So cartoons and books and this and that.
It does feel like those changes have started to take place, even just in the reference from my daughter, because we've had Nicola Hobbs, we've obviously had Alex, we've had the Antarctic Fire Angels. They're fantastic in what they're championing in the fire service. And you start to see women in more leadership roles, not just in the general fire service. Now, through different parts inside and outside of the fire service, you'll have had challenges, or you'll have had moments where you'll be leading teams, and more specifically leading men. And I've spoke to a few female firefighters on my service and said about, because there was a promotion opportunity came about 6 months ago, and they had referenced things like, well, I'm not sure anybody would listen to me. And I immediately jumped in with an assumption and said, oh, because you've not been in too long, or, you know, because they've been in like 3 or 4 years. And they were like, no, well, the guys tend not to listen to me. And there was that moment there. And I wanted to ask your thoughts on, have you ever had any challenges when it comes, or resistance with leading a team or leading men? And do you think, how have you navigated that? What style have you sort of utilized to do it successfully, if you've got an example?
It's hard to lead men. It's hard to lead, actually.
It's hard to lead anybody, I think. Yeah, before you can lead anybody, you must be able to lead yourself first and foremost. And that sort of seems like something you've really mastered, because you've been able to, even though you've been scared or perhaps intimidated, or, you know, you've been the first one, you haven't allowed that to stop you from, you know, doing what you want to do and do what you feel is right. I'm wondering if you've ever had to utilize that in a leadership position, if you've ever had to challenge anything that you felt wasn't appropriate.
I guess you possibly just putting yourself out of your comfort zone a lot to do that kind of thing, aren't you? You've just got to essentially kind of grab it and, you know, run with it, and, you know, put on that kind of bravado. And essentially anything you do for a period of time, you're going to end up thinking you're faking it. You've got to make it, fake it till you make it. That's it. That's what it's going to be, isn't it? You know, fake it till you make it. Whatever you're doing, you never feel that you really belong, or that you should be there, you know, whatever it is.
It's that imposter syndrome, isn't it? I wanted to ask you about when you left the service, because you were in the fire service for 6 years, and you kind of you'd done what you needed to do. What made you want to leave, and what came after? Yeah,
I got married to a chap who just left the fire service where I was stationed, actually. David begged me.
I think that's chapter 17, isn't it? I swear to God, I think that. There you go. I told you I'd listen to it.
Yeah, that's it. So we'd met, became friends, and he's a completely mad character. He's been in the Spanish Foreign Legion.
Oh my God!
And then he's come to Thetford, and so he's quite a character. He was English, but, you know, a mad thing. And he decided to go off and do work on expeditions in South America. And off he went. So I was really that bored as well, starting to get bored at home. Once I sort of accomplished something, the challenge is gone. So I'm not very good at staying the length of any career, really. Once the challenge is done. So he rang me up from Peru and said, do you want to get married? And
wow.
That was it. And his mum was a Mills and Boon writer. Do you remember those Mills and Boon romance books?
Yes.
Yeah, well, his mum used to write those, and they've made a fortune writing Mills and Boon books.
Oh,
his mum. So they lived between Guernsey and Spain. David, the chap who I got married to, said, they're going to give us an income to travel, so we get £400 a month. It's a no-brainer. It's great while I've been here. That's what happened.
Even though you had that, association, you had a partner that had wanted to take that adventure with you, it still must have been petrifying. And I know you were already the sort of person that would get scared and still go for it. But I see so many people turning away from decisions because of the unknown and because of they're staying in their area of comfort. I mean, you were clearly having some great success in the fire service. You'd become a professional firefighter. And I obviously do stuff outside of the fire service as well. I have that little entrepreneurial itch and that taste for adventure. But how did you feel having left, yet still having such a powerful story? And it's still a great example of so many of the things that you share these days. What led on to after that with your partner?
So I love the adventure of it, to be honest.
Yeah.
The things I do. I love it. I hate being in that warm place. I get really bored really quickly. And so travelling, to that kind of part of the world, and it was very dark in those days. It was still like the early 90s.
You went off and did some wonderful charity work as well, didn't you? Because I had written down in my notes the Cambodia charity that you did a lot of work with. How soon after leaving the fire service did you start doing that work, and what sort of spurred you to get involved?
That's a good question. So I'd had my marriage with David, and then we split up after about 3 years, and I'd ended up having back in debt with now what do I do? I've got to find a proper job. And essentially I started to do buying work and ended up with my own company in 2000. I started a company with another lady, and we used to import products from China, and then we set up a trading office in Shenzhen in southern China. Wow. Supplying supermarkets with products. So all of my kind of experience of traveling and being all over the place, and then I had some commercial experience, and altogether it kind of combined with, there was the right moment. It was right. So we did that for 6 years, and that took till 2006. So by this time, I was mostly living in China, but of course I started to get really bored again. I was like,
you'd start getting itchy feet for that next adventure.
Yeah, the challenge is done. I'm like, now I'm doing the same thing day in, day out. I can't stand it. So I moved to Thailand, and then from there I started to see different things. Being a resident, I lived a really proper expat party life for a while, and then gradually I got drawn into a side of it that I hadn't known about before. Even travelling with David, stuff we don't really see. So a friend of mine she said, I'm going to move to Cambodia and work with children. I was like, why? Because we haven't got children. We're best quality buddies, It's like, well, why are you going there? I said, no, it's fine. So she went, Connie. When I next saw her, she looked like 6 months later. She looked so happy. She's found the right place. I thought, oh, come have a look then. So I moved to meet her and see what she was involved in. It was like, wow. Such a great project,
Yeah.
With so much heart, and the chap who ran it his family had been killed by the Khmer Rouge. He'd run across the country to Thailand to try and get to a refugee camp.
Jesus.
And taking loads of children with him. And eventually he got there, and he was in the camp for ages in Thailand. Then eventually he was allowed to come back into Cambodia when it was safe after the war. He came back with his now wife and his children. The police were bringing 3 children, knowing they were a safe pair of hands.
Yeah.
But so even there, he couldn't get them back to the parents and their families because of the war had done so many terrible things.
Yeah.
Everyone was learning, had been killed. So they got no structure, no society, no understanding of how to take care of themselves. So Seta started these projects, like a 4-year cycle of self-sustainability, and that's roads and schools and teaching people how to, how to eat and growing the vegetables, how to cook them, school gardens, paying the teachers, and all sorts of things from sewing machine workshops to pig farms to every kind of projects to make, and eventually each village one by one turns into a functioning village.
That's incredible. No, they do say it takes a village to raise a person, and to put all that infrastructure in. It's a different approach versus the flash in the pan of a big injection of money. When realistically, that doesn't necessarily help the infrastructure of a community like that. It can often sometimes have the opposite effect.
Yeah, that's it. And because it's like if you just sat here, you know what you're doing, you understand your community. Because the other thing, they have terrible problem with drugs and alcohol. So they make people sign these commitments that they won't beat their wives, they won't hurt their children, they won't drink,
Jesus.
And then they'll be allowed to have like a fish farm, So they've signed an agreement and they'll have months coming round. So it's very particular for that society. Yes, and when I got there, he worked on like 23 villages, so 23,000 people. And yeah, it's amazing. So he's got funding from all sorts of different places, Lions groups and Rotary Justice. And so he's just that amazing kind of massive family.
That must put some things in perspective when you think about some of the challenges we face in the UK, because no problem's less or more important than anybody else's, but places like that where domestic violence and drug use are such a systemic part of the society, it really does make us look oblivious when we just throw money at charities and wonder why the problems aren't being fixed. It really does. It does take champions such as the gentleman you refer to and yourself to go over there and put the time in, because we can all throw money at things, but putting the time in is a different story. Now, we talk about putting the time in. A book is not a short thing to do, especially you've gone on and done the audio version, which I love the fact that you did it yourself, by the way. It's always really nice. I listen to loads of audio books, and when the author does it, it's better. It is so much better.
They invited me. I didn't know. And like everything when you've written a book, I haven't got a clue what it really meant. And then you get to the next bit, the audio book. You think, I don't know, will they ever ask me if I want an audio book? And then someone said one day, we'd like you to come and read it. And I was like, wow, yes, I'd love to.
So how did the whole project first come about? Was this something that you'd obviously realised that your story was somewhat unique? We've already referenced there was women already in the fire service and all that sort of stuff.
No,
but
there's nothing to do with that. Cool. I was over in Asia. I was living in Cambodia and Thailand, and being there, I started to be, particularly in Cambodia, it draws a lot of people who are journalists and humanitarian writers. There's a massive, fabulous core of people there who are like outstanding. They're world-class people, and you're like sitting in the bar with them, and you get influenced by them. And there was a massive tsunami down in the Philippines, in Tacloban, and I wanted to go and write about it. And a friend of mine was a photographer, and I said, can I come along and write? I didn't know what I was doing as a journalist. But we've got a journalist part, and we've got a lot of it is, I don't have any fear of anything. So you try and turn up, you're in the first flight in to what has been completely devastating. 1,000 people have been died, and it's like instantly wiped out. There's nothing there. And none of that really bothers me. I don't know why. So essentially, then you're trying to find people's stories and tell their stories. Yeah. So that's how I started to write. And it was really more because I was in a place where there weren't many other people. And again, because I didn't really know what I was doing, I was finding kind of odd stories.
I love that. I didn't really know what I was doing, so I thought I'd just start writing.
Yeah, but if I was a trained journalist, I'd probably gone about it completely differently. But I didn't know, but they did, and then they did get published. My stories got published in like the Phnom Penh Post and, some Bangkok magazines. And after that encouraged me with the same kind of group of people after the earthquake in 2015 in Nepal. I went up there, and as I got up there, same thing, the first flight in, you don't know what you're going to get when you get there, but it's going to be devastating, that's for sure. And the woman who ran UN Women in Southeast Asia asked me if I'd write for them and do an assignment as a comment. Yes, I love that. That'll pay all my bills.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course I will. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's it. So I did 4 days for them. And from that, when I got back to Cambodia, someone in England was saying to me, Joe, it was a friend in Thailand. Every time I travelled around, I'd ended up with hardly any stuff. You start out when you move, you've got a container of stuff. You come on bicycle and the dents and nothing. Give it all away.
Isn't there something great about though? I want to double click and segue on that, because are you aware of minimalism? You know, the thought process of minimalism and that. Yeah. So they speak a lot about, I think the two gentlemen that started it, they move house and they pack all of their stuff up and they say, look, after 12 months, anything we haven't got out of the boxes, we'll just get rid of it. And it does astonish you as to how much we fill our lives with things that don't really matter. We are really materialistic buggers. Anyway, you'd got to that point where you had just been puddle jumping and, you know, different travels, and you had basically nothing.
I just had one plastic box, which was a big underbed box, which is full of my fire service cutting.
Really?
And then, so one of my friends in Thailand, he said to me, Joe, he was a photographer and he used to work at the NMV back in the day. You know, he photographed Kirk Bain in the day. Wow. And he said, a friend of mine, he's a writer in England, you know, I'd like to introduce you to him, Paul Moody. And so he and Paul Moody and this chap used to travel all around the world, like living it up in the 80s with all the rock stars and all the crazy stuff that they did. So he said, you should talk to Paul Moody because he's written a book and, you should write your story. I said, I don't want to write my story. I really don't. Nothing further from the truth. And he said, no. And he went on and on and on and on and on and on. But so we're still over there. And Paul helped me pitch. And he put together with me like the 3-chapter pitch that you have to do because he published a couple of books, so he kind of knew what he was doing. Yeah, and he's like, 3-chapter pitch, and it went on for 4 years. And this was somebody who knew the industry, and was very switched on. And it still took that long, but eventually somebody. So I was still in Cambodia doing my stuff, with settled on, going out, checking out chicken farms, and taking visitors around the place and stuff like that. And then all of a sudden, there's like this email. It said, "You've got a contract. You need to come back to England."
Oh my God!
Oh God! So when I got back, I've been away for so long, so detached. I haven't got a clue what's happening in the real world. I didn't used to listen to the news. I didn't have any contact with my old fire service friends because I always got really embarrassed I was there. I thought, oh God, how embarrassing! I left. You spent all that money on training me, and I disappear. All that stuff. I had so much press. So then I came back and I went to where I trained at the headquarters there and chatted to them, and I was like, "There's hardly any women." Like, okay, so that kind of started. Also, by 2016, I was writing, and it took a year of hell.
I was going to say, because I spoke to a few authors, and it really is a labor of love. It's not an easy thing to do. But you spoke about having a resistance the first time the idea was pitched to you. It's, you should write your story. It's really inspiring. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people struggle with that. But how many people do you think, and this is a bit of a hard question to answer, but how many people do you think wouldn't write the book? Because for every one person like yourself that has taken the time and put in the effort to put their inspiring story, and there's many, and you acknowledged this before we came on the podcast, you were like, there were so many incredible women around at that time. It was just a sort of accident of meeting the right people in the right places that this came to fruition. But how many people do you think, and not a number, but don't tell their story? Because there's an entirely, you think of the sliding doors analogy. There's another universe happening where you and I are not having this conversation because you didn't make that phone call or you didn't send that letter. And I think it would be really refreshing for people to hear how, with all due respect, unstructured it was to get to where you are. You were just out there doing what feels right, going with your moral values and trying to make a difference in the world. And only through that did you come to where you are now. It wasn't I left the fire service and then I decided to do this. And in the end, I was always going to write a book. That was the big plan. So, what sort of tipped the scales to make you do it, to make you put pen to paper? Because there must have been lots of moments where you were like, this doesn't sound good enough, or it's not interesting enough. And what kept you going?
Oh, that was very much the pressure from my friends in Thailand and Paul Moody here. They were like, you have to tell your story. I was like, I don't want to tell my story. I like writing about other people's, things. But eventually they were like, really, there's really not that many women, you need to tell this story. And you don't see your own story, you know, like initially you just don't see it. It's like, I haven't really even looked in the cuttings for years. I've carried some around, you know. But then you start to kind of put it together and then once you start, you get your structure and of course, because I hadn't worked properly for years. I mean, I hadn't worked since like 2006 properly. Yeah. So I had been out of the oh God. So when I got back to England, and at this time I was like on my own, I was a single girl. I went to my brother's in Norwich and spent, you know, I've got no money in the little bedroom in his flat, you know. So like, and he used to like buy the cigarettes and buy the wine and feed me and and my friends were like, they were astonished I was actually like, I sat down and did it, you know. They couldn't believe I actually did it because I've been off radar for too long.
How do you go about doing that? Is it do you work with sort of a guide or a mentor or somebody that helps you with that structure? Because I've thought when I was reading your book and my wife said, oh, you know, you'll end up doing something like that one day. I was like, I don't know if I could remember half the stuff. Do you know what I mean? Some of the stuff that's in your book is awesome. And you hear some people referencing, oh, you know, lucky I kept journals. And I'm like, I don't keep journals. You know, I used to write a journal, but now I haven't written one in years. And I think all the stuff that have been great in my life, I don't know if I could recall half of it.
That's the problem I've got. Everyone's like, write a next book, and I'm like, I can't remember what happened next. That's the truth. I've got like brain. I've got no. Yeah, I'm like you. Yeah. So for me, the book was like that was another thing. Because I have got a really bad memory, and I was like, I can't remember.
Yeah. So all the time you're like to the best of my recollection is basically half the time.
Yeah, but I really couldn't remember. I mean, especially since. So I started to talk to people I used to work with, and so some of the lads who trained with me, and some of the guys I used to train or was accepted with, Nigel Monument, who was my boss, Angie Bates, my lodger, and between all these characters and my cuttings and kind of. And again, it's not a diary. It's more of a, you know, it's the essence of more. But yeah, I was really scared technically. I thought, here we go. I'm going to make some real things. Like, some people going,
someone will come. You didn't write that about me. That wasn't my time. That didn't happen. You weren't on my watch. And you're like, oh God, I can't bloody remember. I think it was about right.
So it's very limited. And so that's like very much about, you know, I had got some memories. I've got my cuttings. I've got my brother actually, because of course he was like, he's got a really good memory, thank God. So between all of that, I kind of pulled it together.
Yeah, my wife's the same. She's got an absolutely bulletproof memory. I'm terrible. I can't remember what we did last week. She'd be fantastic when that moment comes, I'm sure. So you must have known as the process started, or maybe you didn't. I don't know, but. You were starting to become recognised sort of in the sector, and you've now obviously not during COVID time, but your time as a speaker and going and sharing your message. How early on did that start? Because I've seen some of your YouTube videos and stuff like that, and you have a wonderful skill of articulating your story. Because I think, and you're the same. You know, so many people have a wonderful story, but it's can you articulate it and can you find a way to help your words empower another person? How early on did you realise that you had that sort of unique skill set, and how hard was it to get up and speak in front of people?
Yeah, I mean, again, at first I went to things like the WI and the libraries. That was brilliant because I started to build my story. Yeah. And then I'd start like, I'd always go into them and say, good evening, ladies, or good afternoon, you know, how are you? Like, I've got a couple of rules: no heckling and no snoring. I'll take it. And then I'd like be able to start, and you know, so that was my silly start. But that really helped me doing those because before I'd never spoken about anything like this, and I'd never, you know, so it's a new thing completely, isn't it? It really is new. And then because again, it's like going down to BBC. It's like, I'm all right, you're okay to a certain point when you start to get really uncomfortable. Yeah, and then, you know, it was quite terrifying to be frank, you know, especially at the beginning, especially. And I couldn't believe it was really happening, but it's great that it's happening on the other hand. So, and now I've got kind of things, I think, I guess it's such a nice thing to be interviewed as opposed to talking, because when you talk, you tell the same story, you know?
Yeah. People have said that when I say about coming on the podcast. They're like, "Oh, I don't really like talking about myself." I says, "You're not. It's different. It's a conversation with somebody who is sincerely." I research and look up all the guests. When you're sincerely interested in somebody, it's easier because you're not pitching yourself. You're not anything. You're just talking about that curiosity. Because I've got a massive interest when I saw that you'd done the book, and it was kind of a weird one because super passionate about the fire service. Obviously, I've seen Sabrina and Cohen's book and stuff like that. You had an audiobook, you had a powerful story. There's a couple of female firefighters I work with, and it was just this beautiful hybrid. And I couldn't believe that I hadn't come across you up until maybe a few months ago. And it's wonderful to see that you're stepping out there and sharing your story like that. Before we get on to the final pieces of the book, I wanted to ask you, as we move sort of out of COVID now, what are the next sort of big steps for you, and how do you start to reintegrate yourself and start sharing your message more? Because we've got the book, we've got the speaking. Where are people going to be seeing you over the next sort of 12 to 18 months?
Good question. I don't really know. I mean, a lot of what happens tends to happen quite last minute with me. A lot of I don't really normally do, to be honest. I'm kind of here unless someone says, "Do you want to go here, do that, go there?" When I went to Australia to talk, it was brilliant. And I did feel, God, I'd love to do this around the world.
Yeah, that'd be incredible.
So many amazing people.
There is something to be said in that free spirit, and it's clearly something you've never really lost.
No, it's here.
What's it like living with that, though? Because I think it's quite difficult for me if I don't have projects ongoing or I don't have something exciting on the horizon, or like you've sort of referenced before about having itchy feet and wanting to change gears or go and change and do something new. How has that been like with other people in your life, and has that ever caused you a bit of a problem? Because some people get to a point in their life, whether success driven or they get to a certain age, and they go, "I'm good now, I want to quote unquote settle down." It looks as though you've never lost that desire to keep pushing and keep having another adventure.
But you see, that's the thing, because it's me as my character, so that's who I am. This is really normal for me. To be honest, being here and having had the chance to kind of push the female firefighter group into another gear has been amazing. Doing the other things I do for the charity, the trees, has been amazing. Pushing my profile to, be the visible role model. They're they're almost enough at the minute, because there isn't a lot of other time in the day, to be honest. It's quite full. So you have time to watch it.
I love that, though. Like you say, I always say to people about multiple hats, whether it's coaching or podcasting, or I have 4 days off from the fire service, but by the time I come back, it feels like I've been gone a week, because I've been doing some traveling, I've been talking to incredible people such as yourself. I think in this day and age, having multiple things going on has been a bit of a sort of way that I deal with my own mental health personally. I think the age of having one sole thing to focus on in what is now such a wide and confusing, loud world has been something that's certainly helped me. Do you think there's anything around having different hats in life and being able to engage in different passions rather than just having that one fixed mindset and just doing one thing?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, I've not felt anything over the COVID. Being trapped at home could have been like being trapped at home, but I've been able to really use it for so much. And I just don't really, time's gone so fast the last year.
I think that people think it's absolutely dragged by, but I think it's gone by in a blink. It's just, there is not enough hours in the day. I could have 2 weeks off from work and I still wouldn't get all the stuff done that I've got written down here. I'm like a kid in a toy shop. I keep seeing shiny objects and amazing people that I want to speak with. And every time I do, it accidentally throws another load of stuff that I need to get done. I wanted to finish by asking you, because I sent you a cheeky request just before we came on about two things. One, I'd asked for a copy of the book for my daughter, because I know she mentioned you and it's something that really inspired her. But when I had mentioned to a few colleagues, I was like, "Oh, have you ever heard of Jo Reynolds?" And they were like, "You mean Josephine Reynolds?" And I was like, "Yeah." And they said, blah, blah, blah. And I said, "Look, I'm speaking to her and I'm hopefully going to get a copy of her book. And I think it'd be great to auction it off." And they said, "That'd be fantastic if it'd be a signed copy." So we said before we came on that we would try and put something together whereby we could come up with a cool sort of way of sharing your powerful message and also giving to charity. So we're going to have one of your brand new book, Firewoman, signed copy, and we're going to be auctioning it off for a charity of your choosing. I think we've already referenced it. Is it going to be the Cambodia-based charity?
Yeah, it is. So as soon as COVID kind of hit all around the world, I realised that the funding that they would normally get probably will completely be decimated. There'll be very little fundraising going on because people are really struggling, all over the world in ways they would never expect to. So, yeah, I thought, what can I do? So I resurrected part of a project that I'd started years ago with them. And it's essentially, they've got a farm. So the chap who runs this thing has got a farm, and part of what he does is he grows seedlings and he grows trees. So we plant out seedlings. So he grows them in the farm, and he plants them all around these like massive areas of scenery that have been, there's not much there, so it's very hot and very dry. But yeah, so what we do is we charge £10 for each tree, and then you've got a tag, and you can put whatever you want on the tag, So it could be a bereavement, so like a memory tree, or a tree of love for someone you love, or just a sweet message for a birthday, Mother's Day, Christmas, Valentine's Day. And so for £10, you get a tree of love, we call it, and then they get planted with your tag. And on the Facebook group, we then have a photo album, and you'll get like a GPS satellite thing, so you'll know exactly where they are. And there's a photo album in their Facebook group, and so it's really sweet. Most of them get planted around the primary schools, the secondary schools. The really sweet one last week was they were actually a family of 11, bless them.
Jesus.
So to have fruit trees planted for them, in their tiny little area was like meant the world.
So for everybody, if I'm hearing you correctly, so the way I think we'll do it, and I'll put something on the end of this, is for everybody that donates a minimum of £10, they'll of course be getting their very own tree. They'll get their name on it. They'll be let into the Facebook group. They'll be able to see exactly where it's located and how you've beautifully articulated it there. They'll be making a real difference to a family or a community over there. So anybody that donates a minimum of £10 will be getting that. And then when this podcast goes live, we'll run it for 2 weeks. We'll check the donations. And then whoever, it's all publicly accessible, we'll put down sort of the top 3. Whoever donates the most effectively, you'll be contacted via the Firefighters Podcast, and we'll GDPR and all that sort of jazz. We'll get your name and address, and we'll have a signed copy of Firewoman. So minimum £10 donation probably won't win you the prize, but the minimum of £10 will definitely get you that tree planted in your name. You'll know that you're making a difference, something that's important to Joe and that's important to communities around the world. But those who give the most will be one of the very few that are able to get their hands on a signed copy of your book.
And of course, I'll dedicate the book to them as well. So it won't just be signed, but I can put a message in for them.
There you go. It won't be signed by your partner or the kid down the street. There'll be something specific in there from Joe. Wonderful. Joe, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to be here with us on the podcast. I really, really appreciate it. I don't take your time for granted. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you so much. Great to chat with you. Thank you. Really, it's a lovely conversation.
I'm really happy you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it as well. And I'm so glad we're able to make it happen, because I try and plan stuff with awesome people such as yourself. And sometimes they're just super, super busy. So I'd be respectful if you hadn't made it today, but I'm grateful that you did.
No, thank you so much. Take care, love.
Thank you so much. I'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. Hey everyone, and there we have it. I really enjoyed hearing that playful, gregarious side of Joe's character. She's so used to operating in these big audiences, these incredible men and women from the fire service, these ambassadors, these champions, these titans of business and sector, that, you know what, it's lovely just to hear a conversation with her. Let her hair down and tell us the real story behind it. As I referenced a few times in our chat together, I jumped in there and got Joe's book on audio because it's her that does it herself. She narrates it. It was awesome. Really enjoyed it. If you enjoyed hearing her voice today, basically it sounds very similar, only a lot better because the audio quality is a bit better. It's a wonderfully inspiring story, so I strongly encourage everybody to head out and take a look for Firewoman, the extraordinary story of Britain's first female firefighter. Again, it's available on paperback, audiobook, or Kindle edition, so no matter how you like to ingest your books, you will be able to find it somewhere. If you haven't used Audible before, get on there and have a listen. It's really good. A bit like having your own wonderful conversation with Joe, except when you say things back to an audiobook, it tends not to reply, but still. Thanks again for coming back to the Firefighters Podcast today. It is our incredible passion to find these inspiring people from in and around the emergency services family and share their stories with you. Joe is just such an incredible example of that. But just before you go, a little request from me. If you're enjoying the content from the Firefighters Podcast and you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please go ahead and leave us a review. If you're listening on Spotify, if you're listening on another platform, go ahead and share it with somebody. Drop us a like, drop us a follow. If you're enjoying this, you owe it to somebody else to share this message with them and give them that little bit of optimism as well, that little bit of enthusiasm, and perhaps that little bit of inspiration. We thank you so much for your reviews. We thank you so much for your feedback. We thank you so much for your support. We do not take your time for granted. So thank you once again for lending your ears to the Firefighters Podcast. We hope you have found your time a valuable investment to us. Jump in the notes below to find out more about Josephine's story and sign up to our emails to get a notification of the next episode. They come out every single week. And in that email, you'll be able to find the links to that person's website, to that person's book. For example, Joe's is in there. You'll know how to get hold of her, where to buy the book, and you'll be notified of all the new episodes as they come out. Thank you so much. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay hungry, and we look forward to seeing you again real soon, right here on the Firefighters Podcast. Thanks for stopping by.